car tailgated me for miles, but disappeared whenever I blinked. At first, I blamed my eyes. It was past midnight on a stretch of highway that cut through low marshland and forgotten forest, the kind of road that existed only to connect two places no one wanted to stop between. The asphalt was black and glossy from a recent drizzle, reflecting my headlights in a wavering tunnel of pale gold. The white lane lines were cracked and reptilian, slithering under my hood in a steady rhythm. In my rearview mirror, twin headlights hovered too close. Not dangerously close, just close enough to feel intentional. My engine hummed in a low, consistent register, 4 cylinders working harder than they liked. The heater breathed dry warmth over my knuckles, but the air near the windows still felt cold. Every few seconds, wind pressed against the car's side panels with a hollow thump, like something pacing me just beyond sight. I adjusted the mirror. The lights stayed there, fixed, patient. I don't know when I first noticed the pattern. I blinked, slowly, reflexively, and the headlights were gone. The highway behind me yawned empty, just wet pavement and darkness swallowing the shoulder. I frowned, leaned forward, and blinked again. They were back, exactly as before. Same distance, same intensity, not catching up, not falling behind. My throat tightened. Maybe a dip in the road, I thought. A hill I hadn't registered. The kind of minor elevation change you don't consciously track at night. I told myself that and held my eyes open longer than was comfortable. The wind picked up. The marsh grasses along the shoulder flattened and rose in uneven waves. Their movement reflected in my side mirrors, long shapes bending and straightening like black fingers. I forced another blink. The headlights were closer, not by much, a few car lengths shaved off, enough that I could see the faint outline of a grille between them. I hadn't heard acceleration. My engine note hadn't changed, and I hadn't slowed, but the distance had shifted. I checked my speedometer. Steady. Another blink. The grille sharpened, metal lines emerging from glare. The headlights seemed wider apart now, too large for a standard sedan. Too symmetrical. I swallowed and tried not to blink again. My eyes burned. The road stretched straight for miles, no turns, no intersections. The tailgater should have been obvious in my peripheral vision, but whenever I tried to glance into the side mirror, I caught only fragments. Light at the edge, a shape slipping out of frame as though it understood angles better than I did. A drop of condensation slid down the inside of my windshield. I hadn't noticed the fog forming. I blinked. The headlights filled the mirror. They weren't behind me anymore. They were level with my back seat, impossibly close, as if the front bumper were inches from my trunk. But I felt no impact, no vibration, just the steady hum of my engine and the faint hiss of tires on wet pavement. I gasped and jerked my eyes open wider. Gone. The mirror reflected nothing but my own back window and darkness. My pulse hammered in my ears, and the next street sign loomed ahead, reflective green paint flashing in my headlights. I read it automatically, desperate for something normal. The name meant nothing. I didn't remember passing that marker before. I blinked. The headlights were ahead of me. For half a second, they shone from the horizon line, facing me directly in the opposite lane. But the beams didn't flare or blind me. They were soft, diffused, as if underwater. Then they snapped back into the rearview mirror. I tasted metal. That's not possible, I whispered, and my voice sounded muffled, swallowed by the upholstery. The car behind me didn't drift or swerve. It held perfectly centered in the lane. Too centered. Human drivers wobble. They correct. They overcorrect. This one did neither. It matched me like a reflection. I tested it. I nudged the steering wheel slightly left, tires brushing the rumble strip. The vibration crawled up through the chassis and into my hands. The headlights did not shift. They stayed fixed relative to my car, not the lane. As if they weren't on the road at all. My eyes watered. I had to blink. When I did, the world seemed to stutter. The dashboard lights elongated. The numbers on the radio stretched like melted wax. The headlights in the mirror split into 4, then 2 again, then something that was not headlights at all, ovals of pale illumination embedded in a surface that was too flat to be metal. They weren't shining outward. They were looking inward. At me. I snapped my eyes open fully and nearly veered off the road. The car behind me was closer than ever. Close enough that I should have felt its presence as mass and speed. Close enough that one tap of the brake would cause a collision. But I didn't feel air displacement. I didn't hear another engine. Just mine. Blink. The shape shifted higher in the mirror, as if it were perched above my trunk rather than on the pavement. Its proportions were wrong now. Roofline too low, windshield too long, body tapering into darkness instead of meeting wheels. I couldn't see tires. I realized then that I never had. A cold pressure spread across my back, the unmistakable sensation of being observed not from behind, but from within the same space. Blink. The headlights were inside the car, reflected faintly in the rear glass, hovering where my back seat should have been. Pale light washing over the upholstery, outlining the headrests in ghostly silhouette. I twisted in my seat. Nothing. The back seat was empty. But in the mirror, the lights remained. Steady. Patient. They weren't chasing me. They were aligning with me. The realization arrived like a bruise blooming under skin. It wasn't following the road. It was following my perspective. Every blink wasn't a disappearance. It was a repositioning. It only existed where I expected it to be. My breathing grew shallow. The forest thickened on either side, trees crowding closer to the shoulder. Their branches arched overhead, forming a skeletal canopy that swallowed even my headlights' reach. The world narrowed to the interior of my car and the impossible glow behind me. I squeezed my eyes shut deliberately, longer this time. When I opened them, the highway was empty. No headlights. No reflections, just darkness and the steady hum of my engine. I laughed once, sharp, brittle. Okay, I muttered. Okay. The pressure in my chest loosened. Then I noticed the silence. Not the absence of wind, the absence of my engine. The tachometer needle rested at 0. The speedometer read nothing. But the road still moved beneath me. The lane lines still slipped under my hood. The car glided forward without vibration, without sound, without effort. And in the rearview mirror I saw why. There were no headlights anymore. No grille. No shape of a car. There was only the interior of my own vehicle, seen from behind. My head, my shoulders, my hands gripping the wheel. As if another driver sat where the tailgater had been, looking at me from the exact distance I had been watching it. The perspective was wrong. Too high, too centered. I blinked. The reflection smiled. Not my mouth. Something wearing the angle of my jaw, the outline of my face, but stretched subtly wide, like a photograph pulled at the corners. I tried to scream, but the sound didn't form. I understood then. The car hadn't been following me down the highway. It had been calibrating, learning the dimensions of a vehicle, the distance of pursuit, the geometry of mirrors. Each blink was a measurement, each mile a refinement. It wasn't using the shape of a car to chase me. It was using my understanding of one to approach. The final time I blinked, the highway vanished. The marshland, the trees, the road signs, all gone. I was no longer driving forward. I was sitting in the back seat, watching twin headlights through the rearview mirror as they hovered too close to the car in front of me. My car. My hands on the wheel, my shoulders tense, and I felt, with a clarity colder than any night air, that the thing driving now would blink soon. And when it did, I would disappear. The highway lines ahead rearranged themselves into a path leading off the pavement. At first, I thought it was the fog. It had been thickening for miles, rolling low across the asphalt like breath over glass. My headlights flattened against it, illuminating only a short, milky corridor in front of my hood. The rest of the world felt erased. No oncoming traffic, no taillights in the distance, not even the blink of a radio tower. Just me, the hum of my engine, and the long stretch of highway cutting through pine forest. The white lane markings shimmered in the damp, their paint reflecting in broken dashes beneath my beams. Then they moved. Not abruptly, Not like something torn loose. They slid. The dash centerline bent subtly to the right, each segment drifting sideways as if pushed by a slow current. The solid shoulder line followed, curving inward to meet it. Within seconds, the two sets of markings formed a gentle arc that led away from the road and toward the gravel shoulder. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "That's not real," I murmured, my voice small inside the cabin. The tires hissed softly over wet asphalt. The smell of rain seeped through the vents, sharp and metallic, layered with the resinous scent of pine. My dashboard lights glowed a dim amber, reflecting faintly in the windshield and turning the fog beyond into something bruised and unreal. The lane lines shifted again. They straightened themselves, not along the highway but off it, forming a clear, continuous path that exited the pavement entirely. The fog parted slightly where the paint led, as though making room. I slowed instinctively. There was no construction, no detour sign, no flashing barricade lights. I had been alone on this road for at least 40 minutes. The radio had dissolved into static miles ago. The lines waited. That was the only word that fit. They held their new formation with an eerie stillness, bright and precise, extending beyond the shoulder and into the darkness between trees. I should have driven straight. Instead, my hands turned the wheel. The tires rolled over the rumble strip with a coarse vibration that traveled up through the chassis and into my bones. Gravel popped beneath the treads. The sound changed immediately. No longer the smooth hiss of asphalt, but a brittle crunch. The fog thickened as I crossed fully off the highway. It swallowed the road behind me in seconds, erasing any sense of direction. The painted lines continued ahead across the gravel as if anchored to something beneath it. They gleamed unnaturally bright, unmarred by dust or mud. "Okay," I whispered, breathing shallowly. "Okay, this is just a service road." But there was no sign, no indication it existed. The forest closed in. Pine trunks rose like pillars on either side, their bark slick and dark with moisture. Branches leaned inward overhead, interlocking to form a narrowing tunnel. The scent of sap grew stronger, almost sweet, mixing with damp earth and something faintly sour, like stagnant water. The path curved deeper between the trees. The paint no longer looked painted. It glowed faintly from within, a cold white luminescence that didn't reflect my headlights so much as produce its own light. I checked the rearview mirror. The highway was gone, not obscured by fog. Gone. The space behind me was filled entirely with forest, dense and unbroken, as if no road had ever cut through it. My pulse thudded in my ears. The tires began to thump rhythmically, as though rolling over seams in the ground. But when I glanced down, I saw no gravel. The surface beneath my headlights had changed. It wasn't asphalt. It wasn't dirt. It looked fibrous. Dark strands woven tightly together, glistening with moisture. The white lines ran along it like veins. I swallowed hard and eased off the accelerator, but the car did not slow. The engine's pitch dropped as my foot lifted, yet we continued forward at the same steady pace. The speedometer flickered, its needle twitching between numbers without settling. The fog shifted, revealing a sign ahead. It stood crookedly to the right of the path, its reflective surface dull and peeling. I strained to read it as we approached. Detour ahead. But as my headlights passed over it, the letters rearranged themselves, peeling and sliding across the metal face like wet paper. Return ahead. A chill crawled up my spine. Return to what? The trees leaned closer, their trunks angling inward at unnatural degrees. Branches scraped lightly across the roof of my car, though they should have been too high to reach. The sound was delicate, exploratory, like fingers testing a surface. The painted lines pulsed faintly, brightening in sync with my breathing. "You're just tired," I said aloud. "You've been driving too long." The fog swallowed my words. Another sign emerged. No exit. Then, as I blinked, it shifted. No entry. The path narrowed further, the glowing lines tightening until they barely fit the width of my car. The fibrous surface beneath us undulated subtly, as if responding to our weight. A low vibration began, not from the engine but from below. A hum that resonated through the floorboards and into my feet. The air inside the car grew warmer, thick with the smell of wet bark and something coppery. The lines curved sharply left. The steering wheel turned in my hands without my input. I gasped and tried to correct it, but the wheel resisted, firm and deliberate. The tires followed the luminous markings precisely, as though guided by rails beneath the surface. The forest opened suddenly into a wide clearing. The fog thinned here, revealing a vast circular space ringed by towering trees. The ground at its center was smooth and dark, the fibrous texture woven tighter and denser. The glowing lines led directly into the middle. There they ended. Not in a T-intersection, not at a junction. They converged to a single point. My car rolled forward and stopped exactly atop it. The engine cut out. Silence fell with a physical weight. No wind, no insects, no distant traffic. Just the faint ticking of cooling metal and the soft creak of trees shifting in place. The white lines beneath the car brightened. They branched outward in intricate patterns, spreading across the clearing like a network, intersecting, looping, connecting to the bases of every tree. I realized, with a cold clarity, that they weren't lane markings. They were channels, and I was at the center of them. The ground pulsed once beneath me, a slow, deliberate contraction. The fibrous surface tightened around the tires. The trees leaned inward as one, forming a towering ring. Their trunks bent without breaking, bark stretching in long vertical splits. From those splits, faint white light seeped, the same color as the lines. The signs I had passed appeared at the edges of the clearing, half buried in the ground. Their faces turned toward me. Return. No exit. No entry. The messages flickered and rearranged one last time. Welcome back. A tremor ran through the car. Not mechanical but structural. The floor beneath my feet softened slightly, giving way as though pressed into damp soil. The glowing lines surged upward along the chassis, crawling over the doors and hood in delicate, branching patterns. They traced the seams of the vehicle with clinical precision. I understood then. The lines hadn't moved randomly on the highway. They had recognized me, or the car, or something about our shape, our motion, our alignment with the road. They hadn't redirected me away from danger. They had corrected a misplacement. The highway wasn't the intended path. This was. The fog swirled inward, spiraling toward the center of the clearing. The fibrous ground rippled in expanding circles, tightening like muscle. The white lines beneath the car began to sink, pulling gently at the tires. Waiting, not malicious, just patient, as though this was part of a larger system, a network that spanned beyond the forest, beyond the highway, mapping routes no human map could show. I pressed the door handle. It didn't open. The dashboard lights flickered and went dark. Outside, the trees straightened slightly, their branches settling into a perfect ring. The lines glowed brighter, illuminating the clearing in stark white geometry. And as the ground gave way beneath me, slowly, carefully lowering the car into the woven dark, I realized the truth. The highway lines hadn't rearranged themselves to lead me astray. They had realigned to bring me home, to the place where the road ends, and where something that has been waiting for every misplaced traveler finally completes the route.